Okay, all right, I'm Dr. Griffiths. We're going to get start with our second discussion. Hopefully you guys can all see my screen. I'm still working out how to do this thing on Loom, so just give me a little bit of grace. It won't be as professional as some of the YouTube videos we've seen. But all right, so we're going to do intro into TCCC. The goal of this is to think beyond what they've taught you at TCCC, and the goal is to understand like why we're doing the things we're doing. To take you beyond, like I said, manual task monkey into a real resuscitationist to operate at the full scope of your practice, whether you're a medic, nurse, physician, whatever. Okay? So we're going to talk about TCCC. I've learned some things, so I got headphones in, notes this time, because I can't figure out how to do it in presenter mode. And so we'll see if I can make this screen advance. All right, sweet. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the history of TCCC, the data backing it, and the phases. Okay, and so like, why are we going to talk about that? Why don't we just talk about hemorrhage and airway stuff and whatever? Uh, you don't know where you're going until you know where you've been. Okay, at every course that is worth their weight, you always start at the small building blocks. You can't just jump into the middle of instruction and expect to understand that piece of information in the context of history from where you came. So you are truly standing on the shoulders of giants, and really, this might sound grim, you're standing over a lot of dead bodies that probably didn't need to die because we were doing things poorly before. And so now we're doing things hopefully a little bit better. As dutiful apostles, we should pay homage to those who have paved the way because we are following them and following the things that they've taught us. And then the phases is at the end. This is not a TCCC course. The phases is just to let you know, like, we're in the same scaffolding together when we're talking about certain things. We're all speaking a common language. Okay. All right, so some disclosures and caveats. I have no disclosures. I would certainly love some. If you have anybody who wants to give me money to talk about their product, I will certainly do that, theoretically, in an unbiased way, but I would love that. The main caveat is like, this is just my opinion. I mean, theoretically, it's expert opinion. I'm an emergency physician, the ground surgical team, but it's not the expert opinion of someone who's, been on 55 deployments or, has been a trauma surgeon and an anesthesiologist and an ER doc and a command surgeon of some level. It's just the opinion of one doctor, so take it with a grain of salt. I think you should always be a skeptic. Some of my favorite podcasts is The Skeptic's Guide to Emergency Medicine. It talks about why you shouldn't believe all the things that you hear and just come into it with your own sort of viewpoint on it. This is data driven with a fair amount of literature backing, but there is a healthy amount of opinion. So just, it's my opinion. I think it's pretty good, but if you ask 10 other people, you're going to get 10 other opinions on some of this stuff. Cool. This is my favorite slide of all time. This meme will be in probably most of my presentations. The fundamentals are not basic. It may seem very basic to you if you're an E67 hearing this lecture talking about why are we talking about intro to TCCC? Who cares about this? I've done all this crap before. The reality of it is, anybody who you think is good at anything, they're only good because they're good at the basics. You can't be good at the hard stuff if you're not good at the basics. So the basics, fundamentals are not basic. They are essential. They're the most important part of anything we do. I got people working on my house today on my air conditioner because my air conditioner's broke. So I don't know if you can hear all that stuff going around, but I am outside today because it was too loud last time. To become an expert on the things that we want to be good at, we have to start small and go bigger, and that's why we're talking about this. All right. Tactical combat casualty care. This is something that's in the zeitgeist now. Everybody knows about it. Everybody's heard about it. But the reality of it is, it wasn't always this way. And people started hearing about it in the mid 2000s, maybe even late 2009, 2010, 2011. But its origins are much older than that. It's basically a chance encounter. There were people studying casualties from the Vietnam War, and they were reading personal diaries and post-op reports from surgeons and physicians in Vietnam and saying, hey, there's a lot of people who are dying of extremity hemorrhage in Vietnam, and maybe they didn't need to die because the tourniquet had been invented a long time ago. And so it's a little unclear exactly who found this, or if it was kind of a team of people and they found a little bit of this, and the other one found a little bit of this, the other one found a little bit of this, and they kind of just by sheer coincidence or God's will or whatever happened to be in the same room together at one day talking about it. But basically, at that point in time, in 1993, 1996, and just in 1993, the Naval Special Warfare, one of their physicians and command surgeons, put together a working group that said, hey, we want to look at how can we improve casualty care for combat wounded, and in a way that is, more beneficial than the way we've been doing it, with given the data that we know of, there's like large numbers of preventable death from extremity hemorrhage explicitly. The first time the tourniquet had ever been used in combat, I had to look this up, and it's on my paper here. 1674, Etienne Morel during the siege of Besançon in a French victory over Spain. So the tourniquet had been invented for almost 300 years, a little over 300 years since this happened. And so why are we still letting people die of extremity hemorrhage on the battlefield? And so when that kind of information was brought to light, was relearned by these docs who were at Naval Special Warfare during that time, then they said, hey, let's put together a working group and learn what we're doing about this. So in 1993 to 1996, they studied this, Naval Special Warfare. This is Uniformed Services University, PJs, Air Force Pararescue, U.S. Army Medics, 18 Deltas collaborated on the first development of the guidelines. The first article was published in Military Medicine in 1996. First TCCC guidelines were published. There's a lot of problems with these guidelines, but they were a very first step in the right direction. Okay. I tried to find a copy of that original article, but it was, I don't know, beyond my Googling skills. Okay, then like a whole lot of nothing actually happened. All right, so brand new groundbreaking data. Who was briefed on it? People briefed on it specifically. So all the Surgeons General and for the services, so Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, everybody, and the Deputy Chiefs of Staff and the SOCOM Chiefs of Staff were all briefed on the findings from this TCCC review, basically. And it was not well received. They got massive pushback, especially about tourniquet use. There was other complaints, and there were some legitimate problems with the initial guidelines, but they were far more advanced than what people had actually currently been doing, which was basically just like plain gauze and I don't know, giving people IM morphine, and that was really all they were getting, and tons of crystalloids. So I don't know. To that, say boo to that. That's too bad, because there was a brief period of time where we sort of lost momentum after what was ended up being justified as some groundbreaking data. I put a lot of memes in my presentations. They're mostly for me, and maybe people my age or whatever. So if you're young, you may not get them all, but they're for me to keep me entertained while I'm building the PowerPoints. All right, until it finally kind of reached a critical mass, basically. So this is the guy who gets the credit. It was a little bit hard to find the first guy. A lot of people will credit the guy who's going to be listed second as the first, but it was actually Admiral Tom Richards. A little bit over a year after the initial TCCC guidelines were published, he was the then commander of Naval Special Warfare, and he directs TCCC to be adopted by the teams. And so they were the first. Okay, don't let him be twisted. This guy gets a lot of credit for being one of the first. Stanley McChrystal, later General McChrystal, he's the head of JSOC, among many other things. He was basically the second guy, if you want to think about it that way, tied for second, tied for first. Directed 75th Ranger Regiment to focus on the Big Four, which was marksman ships, physical training, small unit tactics, and medical training. Medical training being the adoption of TCCC guidelines during that time. He was then the commander of Ranger Regiment. Went on to have a very illustrious career. They weren't the only ones, but now medical training took a sort of justified position among the other combat readiness training disciplines. All right, we need to be good marksmen, we need to be physically fit, we need to know how to read a map, we need to know how to land nav, we know how to skydive and whatever. We were now really focusing on saying, hey, medicine is just as important as this. Army, JSOC also took advantage of this, if you want to dive into the JSOC realms. But they basically, the bottom line is TCCC found a home within the most forward-thinking units. This is not uncommon. So TCCC finally finds a home in its most forward-thinking units, which seems to be the situation when most believe there's change. It's not coming to the 82nd Airborne first, it's coming to the other people first, and then it gets adopted onto the broader conventional side. There's a little bit of a bucket of crabs mentality when it comes to changing things. You'll find this in a lot of organizations that you go to. Somebody wants to change things, it's like a crab trying to climb out of a bucket, and the other crabs are just pulling it down and not letting it grow or change. So, I don't know, don't be one of those people. All right, this is Frank Butler. It's a little bit of introduction to who these people are. This is Frank Butler. He's the primary author on the main TCCC guidelines that were first published. He's actually an ophthalmologist by training, but spent most of his time in Naval Special Warfare Command and various roles. Yeah, weird. He's an eye doctor, but he must be good at what he does, and spent most of his time in special operations. And the original author. This guy, yeah, this is like an awesome picture. So this is Tom Richards. This guy here with the cross-body ammunition. So this was him in Vietnam. He was in Vietnam in 1970 or 1971, something like that. He was wounded there. That's a pretty badass picture that I found of him. I had another awesome picture. He has had this sick mustache apparently since 1971, but there was a really cool one of him in his Navy dress uniform. But I thought this one made him look more cool and I think justified why he felt the TCCC guidelines needed to be implemented when he was the commander of Naval Special Warfare. So, yeah, Tom Richards, certified killer. I don't know. Cool picture. Anyway, this is Stan McChrystal. I think this is, I don't know if he has what his rank is on his uniform there, but head of 75th Ranger Regiment, implemented TCCC there, became the JSOC commander, the hunt for Zarqawi in Iraq, all sorts of stuff. That's a picture of him. And then this is a famous picture of Army Delta operator who loved TCCC. Just kidding. This is, if you've seen Black Hawk Down, this is one of the characters in Black Hawk Down, based on a real person, but obviously Eric Banner, or whatever that guy's name. That's not, he wasn't in Delta. We'll use him to represent the other people. Cool. All right. Does this stuff work? All right, so new and fancy is nice. Everybody likes new and fancy, but do we actually need it? Like, did we actually need to change anything? This has been studied. If you look at these names, these people pop up a lot. Brian Eastridge, Mabry. There's Frank Butler, the guy from the other picture. Okay, a lot of people jump there on all this stuff. Cotwall here, he's on a bunch of others that we'll look at. Basically, this paper looked at, were the things that we're doing, were they working? Okay, this is in the Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery. Okay, this is for the people who love research, this section of the talk. Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery, December 2012. All right. Death on the battlefield, Iraq and Afghan casualties for 10 years. All comers, conventional, special operations, whatever. All comers. I will not belabor the entire paper, but here's the main points. 87% of people who died from combat trauma died pre-hospital, pre-MTF, pre-military treatment facility. So most of the people who are going to die before they get to Role 1, Role 2, Role 3 facility, any legit medical capability. Okay, that's almost everybody. Okay, of those who died before they got to the hospital, 3/4 of them non-survivable. 75% were deemed to have non-survivable injuries on autopsy and post-mortem review. Okay, about 25% of them were deemed potentially survivable. Okay, red flags, sirens, flashing strobe should be going off in your light. That's in your head that says, well, maybe. It's a whole lot of maybes. What someone says is potentially survivable, what Sean Griffith says is potentially survivable, is different than what somebody else says is potentially survivable. So they do have inter-rater agreement, but there is, conflict in the term potentially survivable. 90% of the potentially survivable injuries were related to hemorrhage. That checks out, right? No one's probably potentially surviving massive CNS injury, massive brain trauma, but they could potentially survive, bleeding to death. So that's probably legit. And then here's where TCCC really makes its money. The site of the lethal hemorrhage, 2/3 of it, truncal, not much anybody can do about that unless you're a surgeon, followed by junctional, also not super easy to control, about 20%. And then peripheral extremity hemorrhage, 13.5% of the potentially survivable wounds died of things that they shouldn't be dying from at all with invention of tourniquets. Okay, now remember, tourniquets invented over 300 years prior to this conflict. If TCCC teaches anything well, it's control of extremity hemorrhage. This paper, Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery, December 2012, shows us that what we were doing before the broad adaptation of TCCC was not working. Lots of potentially survivable injuries. Okay, I had to change locations because the AC guys are working on my house and they were coming outside where I am. But yeah, so if TCCC teaches anything well, control of extremity hemorrhage. This data shows that we need better extremity hemorrhage. Okay, TCCC was not widely adopted at this point in time. All right. This is data from early disciples. Okay, some of the same people on this one. Cotwall's on there. Montaigne Silverman, he's a BAMC emergency medicine grad. Jennifer Gurney, trauma surgeon at Brook Army Medical Center. So some similar people on this one. When I mean early disciples, what do I mean by that? These were people who adopted this stuff early. Okay, it talks about 75th Ranger Regiment. They were early adopters of this stuff. So what were their combat fatalities like compared to other units, conventional units, the broader force? So this is Military Medicine, July 2024, review of 75th Ranger Regiment battle injured fatalities during combat operations for 20 years. This is 20 years of data. Key points, 813 casualties, 62 fatalities. So, Ranger Regiment is a much smaller force, and certainly the 101st Airborne, 82nd Airborne, these like massive units, but a fair amount of casualties, fair amount of fatalities. Maybe you can't draw crazy like population-wide conclusions from this, but I think a decent enough sample size. 0 preventable deaths is what Ranger Regiment is claiming. 0 preventable deaths. 0 deaths from extremity hemorrhage, tension pneumothorax, or airway obstruction. I think this is maybe a more reasonable point to make. 0 deaths from extremity hemorrhage, tension pneumo, or airway obstruction. So that's very impressive data, okay? It's a very impressive claim to say that 62 people died and not a single one of them could have potentially not died with the same injuries that they had, okay? That's a pretty big claim. I think you should be a skeptic, but not a nihilist. You should always be a skeptic, but you shouldn't just like always poo-poo everything. Like you have to have some faith in your fellow man or whatever if you're going to exist on this planet. Is this data legit? Like, it's probably not totally legit. It's probably not. There is probably someone in that group of 62 people who died that maybe didn't need to die. Is every single combat medic at every single one of those fatalities did all the right things? I don't know. Does every single doctor on every single patient case in a day across the United States do the right things? I mean, of course not. Like, we're just humans. Like, we can't possibly be perfect all the time. But, I don't think that it makes the data useless. There is some conflicting data published around the same time that other paper was published that had Ranger Regiment showing 3 preventable deaths from 2001, 2011. And some of these same people that wrote that one were on this other one. And so that's a little bit of conflicting data. But I think, like, overall, you can say, like, hey, the Ranger Regiment, early adopters of TCCC, hard training, lots of MASCAL training, whole blood transfusion. They were hardcore disciples of this, and their data was far better than what we're talking about preventable deaths on this other paper. I mean, this other one is 24% of the people had potentially survivable injuries, 13.5% of extremity hemorrhage. I mean, that's like a wild number. Whereas I think this other number, this 0 deaths from extremity hemorrhage, tension pneumothorax, and airway obstruction, is like a way more reasonable claim than 0 preventable deaths. Cool. This is what I think when everybody tells me they're a combat medic. I'm a combat medic, pew pew, tourniquet. Okay. Again, the memes are for me. Here's the bottom line on the data dive. So overall takeaway, preventable death on the battlefield is a minority of trauma, okay? A little over 12%. And the reason is because they're shooting at each other with tanks and grenades and mortars and like these really devastating weapons. And so most people who are injured so significantly that they're probably not going to make it. But 12.5%, 12.7% is still a large opportunity for us to save lives. We can't save unpreventable death. We can only prevent preventable death. And so that's the number we're looking at. I think we've shown in these 2 papers that we needed TCCC and that the TCCC, when trained appropriately and adopted and aggressively trained across multiple MOSs or AFSCs, that it can reduce combat preventable death. Okay? That is one of the things that Ranger Regiment did, is they taught TCCC to everybody, not just the medic. Everybody's a medic. And so everybody took these courses. Everybody was bought in on the idea that everybody needs to be medically trained. If implemented, so just extrapolating some of this data, and there's like a ton of, things you're taking into assumption by making this math here, but if implemented prior to the GWAT, you're looking at potentially 890 less fatalities sort of overall across all casualties when you compare them to some of these papers, if TCCC had been adopted early. Okay, so that's kind of our data deep dive. We're just going to talk about the phases of TCCC now, just so we're all on the same page and talking on the same sheet of music, okay? This is in the TCCC course. These are the phases: care under fire, tactical field care, tactical evacuation care, okay? Care under fire, return fire, remain engaged as a combatant if able, put people's fire out, pull them out of things that are on fire, avoid further casualties, hasty tourniquets, so high and tight tourniquets, win the fight, win the fight, win the fight, win the fight, win the fight. That could be the whole slide, but the point is, no medicine in a gunfight, do not sustain more casualties, and stop extremity hemorrhage if you have the ability to. That's really it. Care under fire is the easiest one. Just shoot back. Tactical field care, this is what we're really like talking about when we talk about TCCC. This is like, 98% of the material is tactical field care. This is where everybody has their favorite, the ABCs or the CABCs or March or PMarchP or March Pause or whatever acronym that someone's trying to publish and get their name in the literature. They're using the new acronym. This is just where the actual medicine happens. I'm a big fan of March, just that's where I trained and that's what we used, but we'll talk about these in the subsequent discussions. Okay, this is the actual medicine in tactical field care. You are no longer receiving effective enemy fire. You are like theoretically safe, but there are still some tactical things happening around you that you need to be cognizant of. This is some tactical field care training. These are taken on deployment. We put together some training scenarios. This on the left is an Air Force medic who's doing care in the back of a Humvee after a simulated dismounted IED with a dog handler and a dog casualty. The dog clearly does not look injured in this photo, but they were a simulated casualty. Hanging up, this is simulated blood transfusion. It looks like normal saline to you because it is, but we were simulating it as blood, so it's normal saline running with blood transfusion in the field. They brought blood with them. They felt like that was something that they needed to bring. And good thing they did, because that's the way I built the scenario, and they did need it. If you see on the right picture, this is kind of under the brake lights of a Humvee, but it's dark out there. There's a tourniquet here, high and tight on the right lower extremity. That right lower extremity was a simulated amputation. And then the dog is dutifully standing by, but the dog was also technically injured. Cool. All right, tactical evacuation care is the last phase. How to evac to higher level of care and what that care entails. This is really quickly becoming its own discipline called en route care. We're not going to touch on that too much. Go take a CCAT thing if you want to talk about that. CCAT, that is really their baby. They're the pros at tactical evacuation care, but then also encompasses maybe less inter-theater or intra-theater, I don't know, helicopter flights between locations in a battle space. All right, here's my final thoughts. We're going about 20 minutes, 22 minutes right now. You have to know where you're going. You have to know where you've been. Sorry, you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. And that's why you have to learn the history of this stuff. It's super, super important to track down what has been done already and what you want to do going forward. Hopefully, we've proven that this works, that this is valuable, this is worth learning. Because those are real people on the end of the TCCC scenarios, and real people who actually do die in the deployed environment, not just in combat, but just from accidents or whatever. And then hopefully you recognize that someone's going to live or die based on what you do. It's not going to be just like a flip of a coin whether that person's going to live or die. They're going to live or die based on the care that they received and the mechanism of injury that they sustained. Those are really the only two things that are going to be into it. You have nothing to do about the mechanism that they're going to be injured by, but you have everything to do with how ready you are to take care of that person. And so hopefully you take responsibility for that and be the best that you can be when the time arises. Cool. Next up, we're going to talk about massive hemorrhage. I'm going to review the audio, make sure that this earpiece works, and I think my notes were helpful. Here's my sources if you want to go look at some of this stuff. A lot of them are just journal articles, and the CPGs, the trauma CPGs are on there too. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.